Okay, this is the meeting of the ANC3C Public Safety Committee. Today on March the 20th, Wednesday, and we are recording the meeting if you didn't see that advisory. And so with that, we will proceed. Call the meeting to order. As I think everyone knows, this is a tool to assist the ANC with public safety issues, and we're grateful for the engagement of MPD. We don't make any decisions at this meeting, but it's certainly a forum for sharing information and reviewing issues, and then it allows the ANC to take decisions at a regular noticed meeting. First up on our agenda is the update from the Metropolitan Police Department, and once again, pleased to welcome Lieutenant Paul Johnson and Lieutenant James Vandermeer, who will give us an update on the PSA areas that they cover that also include the ANC3C area. And Kathleen, we were just, as we were gathering, talking about MPD training, but with that, I'll turn it over to the officers for a brief update on what they see in the PSAs.
Paul, do you want to go first, since you it's the privilege of seniority, or is it the privilege of seniority to go second?
So I'll go first, sir. Take a little pressure off you.
Okay.
I'll give an update from my PSA 204. This month, I give a 30-day. First of all, I'm sorry, Lieutenant Paul Johnson from the 2nd District. I'll give an update on the PSA crime stats for PSA 204. And this month we have no violent crimes, which means we have no ADWs, no serious assaults, no robberies, no homicides that occurred in the last 30 days. We had 1 motor vehicle theft. We had 7 theft from autos and 25 thefts. In those 25 thefts, we had a recurrent address in ANC3C, which is the CVS, 2601 Connecticut Avenue. In that area, we do have a foot beat. In that area, foot beat officer, we still have one there, I believe, that walks that beat. We did make 1 arrest last month at the CVS. We had 1 closure with shoplifting. And that's all I have to report on 204 crime. But like I said, we had a good month last month, and I do get a crime stats every month since we meet monthly. So next month it'll be the next 30 days, the last 30 days. Any questions for 204 regarding crime stats?
The CVS at 2601, that's the one, I believe it's in Woodley Park.
Yes, sir.
They had an armed guard, and then they didn't have an armed guard?
I don't think CVS ever had an armed guard there. I think their policy is no guards, no security at all CVSs.
Oh, I mean, I've seen one in late at
in
night.
this. Yeah, I don't know about any CVS having an armed guard unless that's something brand new. When did you see this?
Like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Amanda, may know anything about CVS? Their policy is not stopping people and letting people walk up to the store and calling the police after the fact.
Okay.
Unless they changed that in the last 2 weeks.
I can jump in on that, Paul. I spoke with one of their regional asset protection people about a couple plans that we had going on, and actually Captain Harris really kind of pressed them on that, because it's just not clear. We've heard things like there's a policy where we don't call until someone's left the store for liability purposes, but then sometimes, like the other day, I got a call. It said there's shoplifting in progress at a so they have loose policies, but they're loose enough to be able to be flexible. And so, for instance, the one thing we were told was they have sort of an ad hoc policy right now where if the clerk or the sales associate manager estimates that someone has taken $100 of merchandise, of course you have to eyeball it, right? Then they will call us after the fact. But that involves a little bit of eyeballing. And then there's much more subjective criteria, like is this a repeat offender? Do they seem dangerous? that sort of thing. And he did say that they're using some guards, but they're moving them around. So I had 2 ANC meetings last night, and the same question came up. And the answer is, maybe it's a nice thing to think about that they're going to start to put guards in some of these stores, but really what we were told is that they don't have the resources to just start to add guards. So they're going to have them occasionally, and they're going to move them around to try to keep would-be thieves sort of off guard. So that's what we were told. But Lieutenant Johnson's absolutely right that they also reiterated to us that the policy is that even though those are guards there, they will not make a stop for theft. They are there to protect staff and other customers in case something goes south. And they will call us. They will not try to effect an arrest. So they're functionally, they're not much different. They just kind of are almost like a deterrent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me chime in also. Our crime suppression team is also running operations at CVS's. So you may see the police in there sometime making arrests on scene because they're doing something in tandem with the management and CVS. They're doing operations, watching people shoplift and making arrests right then. And that's random going around at the 2D CVS's.
I will say there was one incident that I was a witness to that I find particularly hysterical, that somebody saw that there was an MPD cruiser outside of the CVS in Woodley Park and proceeded to rob it, and then walked out and got arrested right there. And he also had merchandise from a CVS, I think in Adams Morgan. So I just thought that was a little funny.
Well, I'm glad we made that arrest.
Yeah.
That ended well. That story ended well with an arrest. Good.
Well, we've had that's been a priority. And I think it's just because of how part of it is how brazen people are. In the past, the policy was, these are, I think there was a perception that these were, they were like thefts born of necessity, right? So if someone's taking diapers, what, that evokes is, oh my goodness, someone is really in need of diapers. And so it's such a sad thing that they had to steal these diapers. But the reality we're learning more and more as we get intelligence and we just sort of witness these things is that there's just a really massive black market for these goods. I saw a commercial the other day for Amazon, and it boasted that 60% of the sellers on Amazon are small businesses. And it made me wonder. I was like, is fencing a small business? I don't know, but certainly that's a part of what's going on. And we know that we have the repeat offenders. I know that from speaking with crime suppression, one of the arrests they had, I don't know if it was the one you're talking about, but the guy, he said they called me the CVS. He's saying this. The officers have their cameras on and everything. He's saying, I'm the CVS bandit. I'm going to be out tonight and I'll be back in here stealing tomorrow. And then I'm going to go to the one in the 4600 block of Connecticut, and I'm going to get some whatever there. They're just really brazen about it. And so, I think because of all that, we've really prioritized making the arrest and also trying to build the cases. So, I don't know if Lieutenant Johnson is seeing this, but, I know that when we make those arrests now, we're really making an effort to work with loss prevention and go back. So if they have, for instance, that $100 threshold, then there are numerous thefts sub threshold that never even come to MPD's attention. And but they do have to report on that for shrink, and they do keep internal records. And what they're trying to do is help to build those cases for us, so for those repeat offenders, so that when we do make an arrest, they are then able to sort of give us a file. And the officers work with them too, and they go back and they look through the footage, and they really try to aggregate multiple offenses to hold that person accountable. We know that if they have 2 convictions, then previously, then they can be charged with felony theft. And so we've been doing that a few times. And even if that's not the case, then if you get that arrest, you present a strong case to the prosecutors, they're able to get a conviction or a plea, then, there's stiffer accountability next time if that person gets to 2 convictions. Now they're looking at like a felony charge. So, there are a lot of things we're working on, but, there's just limitations about the staffing. I think that we're lucky at the, like Lieutenant Johnson was saying, at 2601, in my PSA at 3327, we have foot beats in both places. But, in at least the 203 foot beat, they cover the 7-Eleven, the CVS, and the Target. We had a theft the other day, and you have to kind of follow up if there's supposed to be a foot beat there, and how this could happen. So I looked at the body worn camera footage, and it was 8 minutes for the guy walked out the store, and the run was dispatched 8 minutes later. So part of it is a lag from when the loss prevention or the management calls 911. Part of it is a lag when they're talking to the call taker. There's a lag between the call taker and the dispatcher, and then it comes to us. And literally, this officer was staring at the front of the Target. He was sitting in the car facing the Target. And so, I'm sure he saw the person come out, and it was just he didn't know that the person had stolen something for 8 minutes, and he's long gone by then because he went into the metro. So, there are challenges even with the foot beats.
Kathy.
Kathleen?
Hi, thank you, officers, for being here tonight, and thank you very much for the increased police presence on the Cleveland Park Strip. I think our feeling is that it has made a difference, and the stats that came from Lieutenant Johnson kind of confirm a sense that people have that maybe things are somewhat easing up. My questions are, number one, do you keep track of calls that are made to MPD? I'm really thinking more about calls within the multifamily buildings, because I live in a multifamily building here on Connecticut Avenue. But that was one question I had for you. Another is, who is following up with Amazon on trying to control these outlets that they are using for for resale of stolen goods? I mean, that's something that it seems to me Amazon should be responsible for. And then, I guess the only other quick question I have is if anybody knows, there was a homeless person who was living outside of Cold Stone Creamery and next to the Target. And now I think that person seems to be gone, and I don't know whether the police get involved in that, or whether whether there are whether it's some of the other agencies, the Department of Behavioral Health or whatever, who would have taken care of that person.
I can answer your second question. It was my understanding through the Main Streets director there that sidewalk is technically not public because it's on private property. And from what I was told is that she was removed by a law enforcement agency. She was not aware of which one. I actually spoke to the woman, and she lived on Ordway Street, and then something happened to her and her husband at the time, and I think she went to prison for a time, but then when she came back, obviously couldn't get housing or anything like that, and didn't know where else to go, so went back to Ordway Street. So it was a very sad story, but that's what my knowledge was of the incident.
Generally, we do have an Officer Charles, who's focused entirely on outreach and speaking to the unhoused, and she's really fantastic, and she has great relationships with them, and she sometimes people don't want to be connected to services, and it's so it's a challenge to try to convince people to that you can help sometimes, and so she really knows. It's not enough sometimes to say, hey, we have some services, wouldn't you like to do that instead of being here? And they'll say no. Right, and you're like, well, okay, but so she, with her like understanding of it, she's really effective at getting people connected to services. I don't know if she was involved in that case, but it wouldn't surprise me because she's really fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. All my interactions with Officer Charles have been amazing, and she is very good at that.
So how about the question about calls? Do you track calls? Because what I've heard from some other, buildings, here on Connecticut Avenue is that they had fewer calls in the month of February. But that the ones they had were rather serious. And, were not just, frivolous, too much noise, kind of calls. So do you track that information or not?
Yeah, OUC, our Office of Unified Communications, they record all calls for service anytime someone
Unified
calls.
does, okay.
Yes, and I think they keep all calls for at least a year, I believe.
And I know that from some of the large multifamily apartment communities higher up into 203, the Tenants Association leadership has FOIA'd OUC to get those numbers, and they've presented me occasionally with just spreadsheets showing the data from OUC. So yeah, it's doable to get that information. I don't think that it's not something that we track more the criminal element, right? And so it's not so much the call volume that does affect things, because obviously we respond to the calls. But I think that a lot of our allocation, it comes down to like the actual criminal offenses. So when we would track the crime reporting as opposed to the call volume, but it does factor into the calculus for us.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to square is that, yes, I'm in touch with some of the folks who get their FOIA information and have had a considerable number of calls and, to various different kinds of, problems, sometimes violence related, sometimes domestic matters. And what is difficult to kind of square is the very small number of crimes reported here with the fact that, say, in one particular building, you'll have something like 14 calls in a month that are serious. I mean, as not the frivolous stuff. And obviously, I suppose those are not necessarily, what I'm trying to get at is those are not necessarily incidents in which, somebody is going to pursue to an arrest and so forth, because maybe, the victim, does not want to press charges, etc. But it's just there's still a little bit of a disconnect in those numbers. I'm just trying to understand what that gap is about.
I think you've touched on one mechanism of it, which is that you have a sort of a couple of different sanctuaries there. Your home is your apartment, but then also those common areas. That's a very homey to you, and you share that with the other neighbors. And so I think that people do feel very vulnerable. You come and go at the same time. You see each other on the elevator, and I think people are scared to call the police or be seen being interviewed by the police. I think that is a part of it for sure. Another part, and this is something we've been trying to work with the property management companies about, is not everyone is. A lot of the problems, at least in my buildings higher up in 203, they're not necessarily driven by residents. So it's their guests coming into these units, and if they have security or they have a front desk staff, they can bar people, right? So they can say you're not welcome here anymore, and if you come back, then you're going to be arrested for trespassing. The statute is unlawful entry, but colloquially it's trespassing. And the problem is there's a process to that. We have to, before we just come and take somebody to jail for unlawful entry, we have to verify that they were warned about it, that they knew that they had this warning, and that arrest was possible. So we track all of that we kind of compile all that information in a barring notice. But if they're not doing the barring notices or they're not doing them accurately, then it hurts our ability to affect those arrests. This happened to me 2 days ago. I think it was 7 a.m. Security called and said, "Yeah, this person's barred. They just walked out the door." And I think in the past, this is something where officers our entire approach would have been, well, they're gone now, so problem solved. But we're taking this very seriously, and so I said, let's get the units over there, let's canvass. They found the person based on the lookout. They made a stop. They went and got the concierge, brought them over, and made a positive identification. Everything was good to go, and went back, and the guy could not find the barring notice. And he said, I know they were barred, blah, 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 but that's not good enough. Before we have to be very careful to make a constitutional arrest when we take somebody to jail. And so we just didn't have the probable cause to do it. And so we're working with, I met with Borger, and so we're working with them about trying to make sure that those barring notices are really detailed and airtight if we end up having to make an arrest and advance that into prosecution. But that was, I think, progress, because I've met with tenants associations a lot, and to meet with the property management, that was nice. I know that they expressed an interest in it, and I've brought it to their attention that event the other day, because it's a good example of how things can, even when someone calls and even we respond and we're able to make a stop, sometimes things just fall apart.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. You mentioned, I think both of you mentioned the foot patrols, which again, we hear from residents and businesses how much those are appreciated for all the beneficial reasons we've talked about in the past. How long are those expected to continue? I mean, we hope indefinitely, but is there a sort of review point coming up? And I ask because obviously we do want them to continue, and if there's any time we need to be focusing on, or whether it's simply through the budget and working with Councilmember Freeman. But we'd really like to see these that you all and Captain Haskis have undertaken move forward. And we'd of course love to see them expanded to the Wisconsin Avenue shopping strips as well.
Well, for my PSA, for 2601 Connecticut, that 2600 block of Connecticut, that foot beat, I know it was authorized through March, and it's March. So by the next meeting, I'll let you know how long. I want to go on forever if I had my choice, but at this time, I can't tell you how long it's going to last. I know it's authorized at least through this month. And Captain Haskins, yep. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah, no, yeah, sorry. It was it's a Captain Haskins initiative, and I know that he fought for it and he wants it, but it's true, we have limited resources. I mean, I think that farther up into 3F, there's a really good case study that would suggest that it's valuable to keep those foot beats there. We have overtime units that we move around on a monthly basis, and so to various hotspots. I think there might be one there. I'm not sure if one goes to 2601. I don't know, but there was an overtime unit on the day, basically during business hours, up there at the Van Ness CVS. And for last month, for February, there were 2 reported thefts. And there was a little bit of a carryover effect because we had to move that unit. We sent them somewhere else for March. And the first couple of weeks of March, everything seemed to be fine there. But then I guess people kind of catch on. And so like in the past week, there have been like 7 or 8 thefts there. And then we did an operation, crime suppression did an operation, and they made a arrest there as well. So we know we're just trying to move our pieces around, but that's a good example of how if you lose the high visibility foot beat or overtime unit, how the deterrent effect goes away, and the theft numbers start to escalate quickly.
Thank you. Any other questions for the lieutenants? Do you have your hand up, Mitchell?
Yeah, I echo the appreciation for footbeats and understanding the time constraints on this month's meeting. I would just put this out there for MPD for a future meeting. I've found the input that you've provided to us in casual conversation during these meetings about ways that ANC and the council can support MPD in their role in crime suppression to be very valuable. And so perhaps for a future meeting, would be interested in your perspective on how post passage of the Omnibus Crime Act, ANCs can continue to focus in ways, similar to the way that Commissioner Nash just, I think, hit on with his question, to support MPD in crime reduction. So given time restraints, maybe, put that out there for our MPD colleagues to contemplate for a future meeting, and thanks again for all you guys are doing.
All right, thank you. Will do.
Courtney Talbot.
Hi, Rick. Yes, thank you both so much for everything. I just wanted to put an idea out there. The DC Aikido just finished a self-defense course, and I was imagining it would be great if we had like a community event, maybe with MPD, with suggestions and different ways that people can protect themselves. Because I do want to increase walking. I love our foot patrols, and I think it helps to have foot traffic on the street. I think the more people that are out, the more eyes and ears that are out, the better we all are for it. And I just want to put it out there, see what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that it's, and like Lieutenant Johnson said, we've been fortunate in this past, since the last meeting, to not have any what we categorize as violent crimes, the serious, robberies, things like that. But as it gets warmer, it's probably we may see things like that, and so I think that you're wise to be vigilant about it. I don't know enough about the self-defense stuff to make any recommendations at this time, but definitely, it is important to continue to remind people that, for instance, we talked about retail theft, but package theft is up as well. And so, using our Amazon locker at the out in the front of the 2D station, that's an option for people. But of course, and likewise, you'd be tempted to say our theft from autos are a success story because they're down in 203, they're down 72% from 2023. But as it gets warmer, and I know they're down in 204 as well, even with that sort of spree of vehicle break-ins that we had not too long ago. So it's nice to see that number in that direction, but obviously we want to continue to be careful. And I think you're absolutely, smart to want to worry about your safety as well, even though we're not seeing things to really be worried about right now. But it's always important to be safe.
Just add this also on our MPD website. There's a general safety option. You can click on it when it talks about when you're out and about, how to travel with others, be aware of your surroundings, try to walk in the daytime hours, and let the family know where you're walking. You can go on the website yourself and just type in safety, and it'll come up, and it talks about how to protect your jewelry, and how to use ATM when you use ATM machines, and how to carry your wallet. A lot of safety tips on here. So when you get a chance, go to mpdc.gov and just type in safety in the search engine and it'll come up.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Oh, and I was going to piggyback off of something Lieutenant Johnson said earlier. We have, and this is something I think that it just speaks to the effort and the change in priorities. Our theft arrests in 203 and 204 combined are up 350% from 2023. So, the officers are working. I think it's rewarding for them to be able to feel like they can, hold people accountable, and they can see those results. And, sometimes things don't get prosecuted, but they can, I don't know. I feel like they have some good energy about it. And I know that the numbers are looking good for that. So I think we're doing what we can. I'm really proud of them. And I'm hoping that, we continue to make progress, and, the summer's easy on us.
Well, thank you. I mean, that progress is really appreciated. And anyway, Lieutenant Johnson, Lieutenant Vandermeer, I promised that we wouldn't impose too much on your time tonight, and I know we've gone over, but once again, the information that you've conveyed and the questions were great, and we do appreciate your engagement and obviously the hard work that you and your colleagues are putting in and, resulting in some of the statistics that you've just relayed to us.
All right, Mr. Nash, thank you, sir, for having us, and we'll see you again next month, sir.
Okay, well, thank you.
See you next month. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
Next up on the agenda, Adam, I think you were going to provide an update on the mayor's recent ANC public safety engagement meeting that you and Janelle attended.
So earlier this month, Chair Packets and I attended Mayor Bowser's district-wide ANC public safety engagement meeting. So let me start with the good news, and then I will speak a little out of turn. But according to the chief, as of the day of the meeting, district crime year to date is down 12%. That includes a 100% reduction in arson, which I thought was very interesting. And violent crime is down 16%, and homicides are down 30%. The only crime category that increased was sex abuse. So that was from the chief. I will say I was a little disappointed with the meeting. There was a lot of, well, the council did this and the council did that and the council and the council and the council. And there really was no, in my opinion, accountability by the mayor for any role that she played in this now last year's crime wave. In fact, her staff presented us with a chart, a line graph, which in my opinion there was percentages, there was numbers, it was all over the place. I don't really know like how it was made or what the X and Y axis were on this graph, but the only thing that was missing from the graph in terms of events, and I circulated this around to the members, was Mayor Bowser takes office. And I thought that was very interesting. And there was a lot of, you need to do this to call the council and raise hell. And there was really no like, and I guess maybe it was just me, but I was anticipating a true leader to say, we made a mistake a couple years ago. We swung the pendulum too far. And this is how we are going to bring it back, where her meeting was like, the council swung the pendulum too far. You know, the council is acting erratically, but this is how I'm going to fix it. And if anybody knows anything about the government structure of DC, the council can't just unilaterally act. And, you know, the council obviously acts in tandem with the mayor. She signs the bills or she doesn't. But I was overall disappointed because there also, you know, there was some engagement, but a lack of true engagement with the ANCs, especially because I personally feel like we are the most hyper-local to what's going on in our neighborhood. So you would think that they would really want to know what's going on in our neighborhoods. But I will say, of the chart graph that I did find a little disturbing, which is why we're talking about safer today, safer tomorrow, is that I believe the district, and I have it here, so give me 1 second, has a 35% of DCPS students are truant. Now, I will preface that by saying, under DC code, truancy is showing up at 9:01 or whenever, like if it's a minute after the school bell rings, you're truant. So I do think that the number might be slightly exaggerated, because if you do show up at 9:01 or 8:01 or whatever time school starts these days, I don't really think you're late, but you're not truant. But be that as it may, I think truancy is more you're ditching school. But I will preface that by saying, obviously our kids need to be in school, because they're not, what else are they doing? But I don't know if Commissioner Paggett, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, with the truancy thing, it was interesting to learn that they like take the children, if they do show up to school late, they don't put them into their classroom immediately. They like send them to punishment like room. And there's no learning being done in punishment room. Just send them to their class, like the bus was late, like whatever. They tried and they're there now. I don't think that that should be immediately resulting in like shame. Things happen. The other thing, it was very much a propaganda event with the mayor's green team being strategically distributed amongst the commissioners. So on the live feed of the event, the audience, whoever was tuning into this, probably thought all the ANC commissioners were on board with everything that her team was saying, and that was not reflective of the reality of the room. And in the Q&A, and a number of commissioners that I'm friends with too brought this up with the graphs that Adam mentioned that had all kinds of different things happening. I don't know if it was meant to confuse, but it was incredibly confusing. There was missing a couple of really key statistics. If you were going to chart 1,000 points of data, why didn't you include income disparity and educational disparities that really do drive and do factor into some of these things when we're looking at the ecosystem of crime, which was another term that is not great used in this space, and it's not productive. So I really appreciate the chief and a lot of the initiatives that she's taking on, and that her leadership team seemed to be making some progress on, and her philosophy about a lot of things. But it was also brought up from some of the commissioners, you know, this is very punitive measure, the omnibus bill. What are we going to do to be more proactive in terms of putting folks, giving them more opportunity so that they're not making bad choices to go into a criminal world, right? And we were told more to come on that later. It was not happening in that meeting, evidently. But I think with the new bills that I think are on the agenda for discussion this evening that Councilmember Robert White has put out there are hopefully going to be effective in that space. And I know Councilmember Robert White has, you know, personal experience and a lot of passion behind the ideas and the legislation in having things be more proactive and preventative than punitive.
Well, that's very helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think many of us feel that what's needed is an all of the above strategy. And, you know, I just point out too, the foot patrols we were just talking about, you know, while I suppose there is a punitive element and that it allows them to maybe make more arrests because they're present, it has a preventative aspect too, because it, you know, it's deterrent. So hopefully it dissuades people from making bad choices. But, you know, more fundamentally, clearly there are efforts that need to happen to encourage, you know, bad choices overall to be avoided, so they avoid the system altogether. On truancy, and I think we're going to get maybe to a segue into the Councilmember White bill, but you know, I've heard that there may be cuts in school resource officers or truancy, but at the same time, DCPS has some fairly rigid rules that, you know, 30 unexcused absences and a student is already repeating for the next year. So it'd be great if there were more proactivity to get the kids in school so they don't trip that threshold, which seems to be rather inflexibly enforced. You know, because I heard just yesterday from a niece who's at one of our local high schools that, you know, someone's already decided to leave school because he's tripped up against that and will not be promoted then to senior year. So, Elizabeth?
Hi, sorry I was late. I am traveling and it is harder to sign on to things. I think one of the really worrisome things about the truancy rate is it really varies greatly ward by ward, and the numbers are really much, much higher in certain wards. And I don't know how you get the final accurate numbers. Janelle, maybe you would be better at this, but you know, I have read that east of the river, truancy is as high as 80% in certain schools. And I think that the efforts need to be made very early in children's education. You know, it's having activities for high school is not really where the help needs to start. It needs to, you know, school has to be a safe and habitable place, starting from the first day you attend. And it needs to be a whole system. So I think there's so much work that needs to be done on that that's proactive. You don't start with 12-year-olds, you start with 5-year-olds. And I don't know what Washington really plans to do with that, but I think it's a huge problem.
Go ahead, Brittany.
Okay, so I just wanted to weigh in on the truancy rates. There is a very odd computation when people are carried truant. There were incidences where there was a car accident and the H bus was late and the lines would be very long. And when the lines are long, you could be on time at school, but you could be standing so far back by the time you got up, you were carried late. They didn't care. This was one of the most bizarre aspects, in my opinion, of how my kids were considered tardy or truant, when in all times it was due to other circumstances that they were not able to get inside the building. So they were at the school. So these numbers can create a lot of alarm in our minds about what's going on with the truancy. Wait, truancy meant you were out skipping rocks at the creek when I was growing up and not in school in line trying to get in, and through no fault of your own be carried late, and therefore after a number of times be considered truant. I'm really discouraged to know that this is still an issue. My kids have been out of high school for 6 years and that still hasn't been fixed. And it is something in the front of the school. They need to be able to pivot and to accommodate weather conditions, traffic conditions, and extraordinary circumstances so that these statistics are more accurately reflective of what's happening, as opposed to you just didn't get through the gate before the bell rang. So
I just want to I want to correlate this back to Elizabeth's question, because from my understanding, MacArthur has a problem with truancy, but it's not truancy in the sense of the kids aren't going to school. It's in the sense of there's no real frequent public transportation to get you to MacArthur. And you show up at 8:01 or you show up at 8 o'clock in 30 seconds, you're considered truant. So I do, Elizabeth, agree with you that we need to get accurate numbers, especially for, you know, in school districts, or not school districts, in schools where the truancy rate is approaching, I mean, at 80%. I feel like we should have been dealing with this a little bit earlier, but I agree. But I do think we need to, we being DCPS, needs to take a comprehensive look at what it really truly means to be truant. Because again, like if you're showing up to school at 8:01, or I would even say like, if you're showing up to school between 8 and 8:30, I don't really know what time school starts these days. When I went to school, it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and I wish I was truant. But if you're showing up at 8:30 and you're saying like, hey, the bus got into an accident and, you know, we couldn't leave because the bus was in an accident, or the subways are not running, or there was a train problem, metro problem. I think there's an opportunity to not, you know, like really look at these numbers holistically, because again, if you made the attempt to go to school and you're 10 to 15 to 30 minutes late and it was truly a traffic problem, then I don't really feel like it should, you know, you should be reprimanded for trying to get to school on time. But I do agree we need to get better, accurate numbers. Kathy? And then
So did the mayor emphasize anything in particular? I mean, was there like a plan? Like, we're going to focus on juveniles, we're going to give more money to support, you know, this or that aspect of kids, you know, or we're going to have particular, you know, programs for them, or more money for decent facilities that are for children and, you know, under 18, whatever. Nothing like specific like that.
Not in discussing the omnibus, the crime omnibus bill.
I think her main purpose, and I actually wanted to touch on security DC a little bit before we moved on to the next topic, but later. Her main focus, in my opinion, of having this meeting was she actually did give us like basically a script to email our council members and to call our council members to say like, this is what I want in security DC, and it was basically like everything that she wanted, and she wanted all of these amendments moved off the table, and there was no plan, there was no action, there was basically an update from MPD, and then there was, please call your council member and say this, because security DC is good, but it could be better if we allowed some of the more stricter aspects of it that may or may not also be constitutional.
Janelle?
You know,
So on the school, the transportation issue to schools, WMATA cannot, it's against federal law to have a bus route be directly purposed for a school in the District of Columbia. So everybody thinks like WMATA is falling down on this. It's legally, they can't make a route that's just focused on MacArthur. So
no, I know.
DC PS has school buses. I've seen them. You know, there are.
but they are usually meant to focus on transferring students with special needs.
You usually meant, but you would think that there would be you know, a fix that with some focus from
Funny.
Councilmember Frum and others they could do.
And
And if you know they do a great job of running those as well.
yeah, I
So
was gonna say there are days where the bus doesn't just straight up doesn't show up.
There's a lawsuit currently against that busing system from students with parents of students with special needs, because that system is so bad and it's so unreliable, and it's actually dangerous because they're leaving children in places. So I wouldn't say like that is a viable solution in any regard to the bus situation and the transport situation of the kids. There also, one of the ANC commissioners asked a question about where are these truancy vans that used to exist when she was a kid. And they are still out there, like the truancy vans picking up the kids, taking them to school. They're the police chief answered it in a funny way of like, not when you were getting in them, to the ANC commissioner, who was like, whoa, very accusational of that there. And she like immediately like realized her mistake. It was like, I didn't mean it that way. But I believe it was the 4th district commander was there to answer the question of how many kids they picked up in like the past month. And it was like 70 or something. And the truancy vans are still out there. But yeah, that's an interesting, you know, nut to crack there. Like you all know kids ride free on the buses and the transit system based on the deal that the district has with WMATA. And so when kids are jumping turnstiles, they're just being kids, right? Like, the other issue with that program is that we make people opt into it. So they're not automatically given their Metro card at the beginning of every school year. It's not automatically attached to their ID card that scans them into their school building, right? We make them jump through an additional hoop to obtain a new card every year.
Yes.
Kids Ride for Free program. And their parents, Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, have to like sign off on this. So like, why when we have all of these programs and all of this stuff is funded and all of these things, we make it so difficult for the people who need the program the most to take advantage of the program that we're offering.
Can
As an easy, like low-hanging fruit to fix it.
You are just spot on because, and I hate to just interrupt. I'm so sorry. It's so exciting to hear this come out because you don't even know how hard it is to register your kids. Minus a retina scan or a blood sample, I had to bring in birth certificate. I don't get utilities. My utilities are included. They don't allow phone bills to prove your address. Every year you have to bring in a lot of documentation. Then your kids get their ID card. And it was so simple at first. When my kids first started school, you had to pay to get on the bus. So I was driving them, and then they had the kids ride free, but it was only on the bus and not on the train. So when the weather was bad, when it would snow and they would opt for the train, they still had to take the train and they still had to pay. It is extraordinary what is required of parents each and every academic year. There's no, okay, you're the same person in the same school the year before with the same parents and the same address. It was really hard and a lot of work, and it's very stress producing, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'm wondering if the truancy figures trigger something financially in the system. I don't know. There's just got to be a reason they are so harsh at that front desk, at that gate, and the way they calculate who's not in school, even at 1 minute. Yeah, it's my guess. It's just a guess. But thank you, Janelle. Oh, I'm so glad other people know it. You suffer in silence as a DCPS parent. You're trying to get everything that you need to get your kid in school and situated. And each year it's just like a huge kerfuffle of paperwork and proving. And if you're not a homeowner or if you don't get utilities, you're all of a sudden you're just invisible, and it's really, really hard.
And you're also forced with spending the time to do the thing that you need to do, and you don't have time to go to the meeting to complain to the people who can make the change, that the change needs to be made because I couldn't do the thing, right? So that's on me, and I will do that.
Yes, for the next generation. Thank you.
Right? And it's frustrating for me because I can see like this is a solvable problem, and a problem that like people shouldn't be having because they're faced with enough going on. And like people have multiple children they're having to do this for, and it's like, really, why are we?
And we're the sandwich generation, and I was caring for a mother living out in Virginia at the time, so it was just crazy. It was crazy. So immunizations, all those things they make sense, but it's just extraordinarily more difficult than it should be. And I'm pretty certain that we can streamline the process a bit better. So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Elizabeth.
It sounds to me that, some of this paperwork is designed to make sure that people are living in the districts that they say they're living in, blah, 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 which I think is ridiculous, because I think the real problem is children are not going to school, not that too many children are going to school, so it's a problem. And I just wonder, with technology today, so much of this stuff, schools used to be very different. Immunizations used to be offered at school. It was part of the, getting ready to go to school, everybody line up and get their shots if they didn't have them or they didn't have the right paperwork. And it seems to me that the ANCs across the city, but DC parents and any of their advocates, including at the city council, should be advocating for schools being more hospitable and safer places to be in, but also providing services. If you can provide school meals, you can provide shots at school, you can provide a lot of things. And it seems to me obsolete technology that a lot of these things are being faced, because I completely agree with what Courtney was saying, that, registering the same kid year after year after year should not be such a paperwork nightmare. It is not in most private schools. You do it once and then you're done. How can DCPS, follow that lead? Because believe me, the technology's existed for the last 40 years.
Janelle, can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah, because you're probably going to answer this or respond the same way I am anyways.
Elizabeth, I love your ideas. I love them. And I am encouraging you to come to our ANC FY25 budget priority meeting on April 4th. Granted, that is if the mayor submits her budget anytime now that she's late. The reason why, and it's frustrating because, like, listen, I grew up, my dad was the president of the school board. I knew more about how a school board ran and how a school district ran than most kids. Granted, it did come with some drawbacks, because if I was 0.1 second late to anything, he would be driving up to school ready to, like, question my entire existence.
Don't report you as truant.
The reason why, it's because the mayor does not budget for DCPS appropriately. And from the rumors of the FY25 budget, it's that the mayor is actually decreasing funding for DCPS and letting go of not just school resource officers, but a lot of administrative staff in schools that would handle programs such as that, or, getting kids registered and things like that, or just, day-to-day operations of the school. And we touched on it briefly, I think, in environmental justice, or maybe it was the full meeting, I don't remember, but it's my intention, so long as our budget letter is passed, to ask for at least last year's funding or this year's funding for DCPS. But we also got to get more money on the table for these schools so they can modernize, because the technology does exist. I mean, listen, when I went to school, granted, I've been out of high school now for 12 years. You would go from class to class, they would take attendance on the computer, it would send right down to the administrative office. And if you were in school, but then you missed one class, your parents would get notified, hey, did you take your kids out of school and we haven't realized it yet, or something like that. And it would be automatic. I think if once the teacher hits send, if you were present for all your other periods and you just happened to not be there when they took attendance, or something did happen to you, your parents would know in 2 minutes or less. And so the technology does exist. And also, the only time you needed to be re-registered and I went to public school, the only time you needed to be re-registered was when you went from elementary school to middle school and then middle school to high school. You didn't have to be re-registered every year. That was something that was eliminated, I believe, 2 or 3 years before I went to kindergarten. So the technology does exist. It's just pushing the right people to push for the right amount of money to move them into the 21st, maybe even the second half of the 20th century at this point, but just to move them into the space where they can use this technology effectively. Janelle.
Yeah, I mean, well, the mayor you saw with the SNAP thing, she claimed that it would take a FTE, a full-time employee, to administer this, and therefore once we start spending money to do a thing, we can't do the thing, it's no longer illegal. That's silly school. And whatever, to speak to DC public school funding, and with the Elizabeth, what you were saying about immunizing children in schools, we currently operate our DC school nurses under a cluster system. This happened last year, where this new model places one nurse, one registered nurse, in charge of meeting the needs of 4 schools. And I believe there's a child that's really suffering some medical consequences because the school nurse wasn't available when she had a need, and it's unfortunate. And it seems like schools take the brunt of any kind of budget cuts that we tend to do. And a budget document is a moral document. It reflects the morals and the ethics of the people who vote the people into office who are doing this. So I think that it's a real opportunity to encourage people to say, like, educating our children is more important than jailing our neighbors. So I know there's a loud group that seems to think that imprisoning people is a solution to things, but educating them is really the solution, and giving folks an opportunity. And I think if you all read the resolution that we just passed on the Green New Deal for schools, that outlines a lot of, these solutions that we should be striving for, and funding more so over incarceration, which actually costs more than educating a student.
Yeah, education is certainly more cost effective. And look, if you look at the aggregate numbers, DC schools are well funded. There's obviously funds that could be better spent so more gets to the classroom. But I think where hard choices have to be made, it seems to me that public health in schools and safety in schools, and of course, core instruction in schools should be the priorities. And they ought to find the money for that.
Oh, Rick, you just reminded me to bring up, sometimes the District of Columbia public schools are failing to meet nutritional needs of the children. And sometimes their only healthy meal of the day. And that needs to have a lot more focus than, like, here's a slice of pizza, it was cheap, be on your way. Like, we need
Fridays
to
the
go
best
back.
day.
Sure.
I
Can
just
I
want
just point out though, please, that first of all, I agree with whatever you're saying, and I very much support a lot of this idealism, but it's not binary. It's not either or. Most functioning societies and cities need a combination of education and then some kind of deterrent. There, if you've spent any time in schools, which is where I've spent my whole career, there are some children who really cannot be in the same setting as most of their peers, and they really do need other solutions. And I'm not saying that's incarceration, but I think if you're going to be realistic, budgeting needs to be available for more than just education. That I don't know a society that I can think of that has entirely educated their way out of antisocial behavior. That requires a different approach.
no, and
I mean, aren't most of the Scandinavian countries like that though, Elizabeth? Like, I know Finland has done that.
Not
and
anymore, Swale, I think that we live in dream
they're
world.
jailing their kids.
I didn't say that children needed to be jailed, and it depends where you put the line on kids. I have friends that have taught in they're not in special situations where those children are residential, and they really have a lot of trouble functioning in more permissive classrooms. It is.
I totally agree that
Unhappy and difficult, but I think it's worldwide. It's not, and I think that I am not
I
saying
mean,
that Washington is good. I'm
this
just
is a
saying
very
that society.
America's very unique in how it jails kids and specifically how it deals with school children. And like it's a very, very uniquely
Where do you
American
put
thing.
the
It's
line though,
that,
age-wise, Swale?
sorry?
I'm just curious, I mean, Have you ever visited a school that's essentially a lockdown school?
In the United States of America, or
Somewhere else.
I've never visited one out of this country. I visited them in the United States, and they are difficult and interesting places, but most of the students that end up there are not first or second strikers.
the United States of America is incredibly unique. We have the highest incarcerated population ever in the world. We're the richest nation in the world. We have the most guns. We have the most people who believe in ghosts. Like, it's just, it's so, and we don't have universal health care paid for by the government, right? So that has a lot of influence on what happens when we don't have a good healthcare system. So there's no behavioral mental health, like stability, and physical health. And that makes us incredibly unique. So I think it's difficult to.
I think you're right. I also, the only other two countries that I have any real experience with are France and Ethiopia, and children leave school in those countries. You know, they're not, you know, they're not really apples to apples comparisons. I'm just saying that if we're talking about Washington, DC, I think that education is the first path forward, but it is probably not the only one. There probably need to be multi-pronged approaches to helping people get to adulthood. And I am not advocating for incarceration, but I am saying for the learning benefit of the students who are in school and progressing, some children do not.
I guess,
thrive in
Elizabeth,
their
what
midst, and they
what would you say is, if it's not incarceration, what are you saying then we should do with the kids?
I think that, you know, sometimes there are different paths forward. Not all children thrive in all school settings, and some need, some do very well in what we would consider traditional schools, and other children need far more support and supervision. And if you've ever
Courtney, go
been in
ahead.
a
You have your
classroom
hand
with
up.
a child who's not safe, Swally, it's a really tricky place.
Can I,
Have you ever been in schools with children who really have serious behavior issues and hurt other students? They hurt their teachers, they hurt other students, and they do it regularly. And that's not everybody, but there needs to be a plan for them too.
I'm gonna
Well,
jump in if I can for just a moment, because both of my parents taught in DCPS. My mother was a special education teacher, and special education is an umbrella for many different challenges that people have. What the first things that get cut in every budget every year are art, music, research, PE, anything outside of a tangible testing curriculum where you put information in and then you test or you teach to the test. And without those other opportunities, one of the things that we keep forgetting in developing these minds are the socialization aspect. You could have brilliant children that are phenomenal in science or in math, but lack social skills. And it's that adjustment, that inability to handle nuanced situations and to come together and work on teams. We lose team funding. I attended both private and public schools, and girls were often in private schools not funded the same way the boys were in terms of teams and learning how to work on teams. So what can we do in our cities to ensure that our students' needs are being addressed? There's a whole bunch of money that gets thrown at schools, and then it just evaporates. You don't know where it's going. It's not strategic, and they don't give it enough time to sort of root in a theory and allow that to grow and allow kids to get acclimated to understanding that what their school is about. And there's so much turnover. There's so much turnover with teachers. Teachers can't afford to live in the places where they are working because it's so extraordinarily expensive and they're so extraordinarily under-resourced. When I sat on the Parent Student Association at my kids' elementary school, we had to raise a lot of money just to keep the teacher assistants in the classrooms. We raised money for hand sanitizer, tissues. We raised money for every event, and we had it. But I can't imagine there was none such ability to raise those kind of funds, nor was there time for parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs, trying to hang on to their living situation and keep their kids in school. They did not have the wherewithal and the energy and the mindset to come to, meetings and then raise funds and then put it back into their schools. It's completely unequal. And without a commission or a team of people that really think about the educational system and make plans, not just immediately, but for something 5 and 6 years down the road, we're going to see these same problems come up. I'm stunned that it is just as hard as it was for me, for parents today to still register their kids, and that this truancy statistic at 35% is just off the hook. And I know it's not reflective of reality, but it sounds bad. And I'm pretty certain it must mean that it triggers something else. I don't know. The lack, when I was growing up, we had a clinic in my school. You had beds, you had a full-time nurse, and kids broke their arms, they got fevers. I still have my immunization scar from getting my smallpox. We stood in long lines. We had tetanus shots in long lines. Everything was done. And the school was a place where you could grow. And in some schools, especially what Elizabeth was saying, the ones where the students are very challenging, it's like a lockdown school. You just get them in there and hope that they don't do anything horrible, and then the bell will ring. There was a documentary that was really well done that followed students in DC on PBS. It ran about maybe 10 years ago. And the different circumstances had the different outcomes. What can we do? What can we ask for? We have to keep trying different things, and we have to allow it to take root. We get these budgets, people implement something, and the moment there's a drop in the revenue, it's the first thing that gets cut.
Kathy, I just want to interject quickly, and then I'll turn it to you. Is that okay?
Sure.
I just want to circle back to Elizabeth's question. I have been very honest about my experience growing up with my disability. I was low vision, and most schools, like Courtney says, lump everybody who has any sort of circumstance that's not considered normal into special education. So I have been in the rooms with the kids that are considered problem. And I'm not going to lie, as a kid, I even considered myself in high school a kid, because could I function on my own? Sure. But did I know how to really make any logical decision? To an extent, but I would argue that, you're still a kid way into your early 20s, because we grow up in a society where a lot of our parents do hover and make the decisions for you. But I have been in those rooms, and I'm not going to lie, they are scary. I've been in rooms where students have threatened the teacher. I've been in rooms where students threaten me. I've been in rooms where the students threatens the entire class. And what frustrates people in that situation especially is, I was being taken out of my class to be put in this special education class because I was considered unnormal or didn't, I wasn't normal. I didn't hit the box. But I tended to thrive in things that were academically based as opposed to physically based, because I can't see. Now, what my school did was implement a school psychiatrist, which I'm not sitting here to say that every school in DC should have a school psychiatrist, and I'm sure some do. but they would work with the students one-on-one that were considered problem students. And you can see some of a difference in them, and you know, it worked for some, it doesn't work for all. There is a balance. I agree with you. There is a balance that is an alternative of locking people up. And like I said, I'm not going to lie, it can get scary in those situations when a student is threatening a teacher, especially a student that is physically bigger than the teacher. But I don't think it protrudes them from being a kid or being a human. It's just they have to be handled a little differently. And you know, I talk about how we had school psychiatrists, and it worked for, I would say, a majority of them, because, you know, they were required actually to sit with the psychiatrist for an hour a day and just talk about like, what's going on at home, is everything okay? And, you know, at the end of the day, most of the kids, at least, and, you know, I'm not saying that listen, I'm not, you know, I grew up in northern Long Island, and you know, we had our public schools, for all intents and purposes, were private schools. They had a lot of money. But you know, there were kids that were acting out because, you know, mom and dad were getting a divorce, or mom and dad aren't getting along, or mom and dad hit me, or mom and dad do this and that. And and maybe I choose to be in an idealistic world, like where I choose that like most kids aren't evil or grow up evil, you know, they're just subject to what's around them. And I do think like at the end of the day, what happens at home is also affecting you at what's happening in school. So if that means like, you know, having more supervision at home by DCPS, or maybe not DCPS, maybe a charitable organization or something like that. But you know, I don't really know how to conclude there, but that's my 2 cents on that. You can go ahead.
Well, I think. Thank you. Well, you know, okay, taking us back to where we kind of started with some of this discussion, which was, you know, what differentiates the United States from other places. Anyhow, the United States, you know, per World Health and UN statistics, has the highest by far use of illicit drugs in the world. Number 1. After that, in terms of alcohol use disorder, we are number 5. You know, you would think it would be all the alleged European, you know, et cetera. No, it's the United States. The kids are suffering for the lapses of their parents. And, you know, what can be done to some degree has to do with money. To some degree, it really does have to do with the schools being reasonable places where the kids can come and feel accepted and be able to spend a good chunk of their day there. I mean, you know, as a kid myself, we stayed at school until like 5 in the afternoon, 5:30. And, you know, there was stuff for us to do there until you were old enough to go work, and then you went to work. But that was all a long time ago. There are things that could be done though with, you know, lots of computers available for the kids, making things, you know, kind of interesting. Maybe even put some of us oldsters back to work and tell us, you know, without taking away any jobs that should belong to wage earning people, we should get back in there and do a little work helping people. But I do have one quick question, bringing us back to the ANC. Do we actually have a draft budget letter that has been circulated?
We don't have a draft budget to comment on yet.
I know that we don't. I know that we don't. I didn't know whether you had something that was just
no.
like a template, or, you know, a ready to go,
No,
depending on what is this or what is that.
So we're gonna try to build off of a little bit of what Councilmember Fruman has asked for in his budget, and maybe we'll I think and I mean, I'm chairing the committee that's writing it, I guess, but I think my intention was to be more responsive of what the mayor is seeking, because, you know, I think we would have an opportunity, especially with Councilmember Fruman, to kind of get in his ear a little bit about what we feel our community needs. But I can send you some examples if you want.
If you get a moment, Adam, otherwise, yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks. Also to just sort of pull us back to the last agenda item, I know we touched on different sort of policy issues that are, arguably within the safer today, tomorrow legislation by Councilmember White. But Adam, is there anything you wanted to focus on?
Yeah. So just quickly before I touch on Councilmember White's Safer Today, Safer Tomorrow bill, as you are probably all aware now, that the Secure DC Omnibus bill passed Council 12-0, I believe, or 13. I don't have the exact vote count on me. The mayor signed it, and I believe the first implementation went in Chinatown around Capital One Arena with the drug-free zones, as well as with Metro Fair grade evasion. I do want to note, because I said something in the email that I sent out as a follow-up to our Secure DC letter. In case you were not aware, the ANC's Secure DC letter passed 7-1. It was included in the record. We had a provision in our Secure DC letter that received support from a multitude of people on pet napping. I had a conversation with Councilmember Fruman, which I was alluding to in the email, but I received a response back that it was a little uncertain. So I just want to clarify. Councilmember Fruman basically liked our letter. In our provision on pet napping, he is hung up on the monetary value of a pet, saying that pets have a monetary value that usually do not exceed $5,000. Whereas cars have monetary values that start at 25,000. So I personally don't own a car, but have a pet. So I'm a little disappointed by that answer, but we are pushing it with other at-large members. So Mitchell, before I move on to Safer Today.
All of you know I'm not a fan of my dog, but I would much rather my car crash than my dog get napped.
Okay, well, appreciate the levity, Commissioner. So with apologies, I need to drop at 8:30, but I do want to thank everyone for the efforts on our letter to support Secure DC and the effort to, represent as many viewpoints as possible and just, strongly support passage. So thank you for that. I wanted to say I'm sorry to hear about some of the counterproductive reports about the mayor's ANC meeting. I would still be, interested, perhaps in a future meeting about hearing if there were any, good ideas that might have come out of it on ways that, the PSX or ANC could focus their efforts. Speaking just briefly on some of the discussion today about education, I think, perhaps the PSX can focus in the future, as we look for ways to focus our efforts post Secure DC on the intersection in topics like education and, other sort of community outlets like recreation centers and stuff like that, and public safety. And, I just would note that I do share the concern expressed on this meeting with some of the funding cuts, potential funding cuts related to education that I hear may be on the table. And, in terms of the additional legislative measure, potential, legislative measure that's on the agenda that I may not be able to stick around to discuss, I'd be glad to, continue to discuss or review the proposed legislation in any way that, the ANC would find helpful. So, glad to continue to engage on potential legislation, and, just thanks to everyone for continuing to make this such a active, and engaged and constructive committee.
Well, thank you.
Jill?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all again for engaging in this discussion. I think this is really helpful. I just wanted to plug a couple of books by Matthew Desmond, a sociologist and a Pulitzer Prize winning author. Poverty by America is like Greatest. Has anyone read it? His follow-on to his book, Evicted.
I just love that you called
I have a whole. If anybody wants to borrow, let me know. I'll drop it off at your house. If it's not available at the library.
We'll be starting an ANC policy book club
Yeah.
committee.
Oh,
So
I actually love that idea. That's such
That
a
is
great
great
idea.
idea.
I would join the book club.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good idea.
Nice job, Rick.
I think he
Angus
just volunteered to
Deaton,
start
you know,
the-
how about Deaths of Despair? You know, that whole series of stuff.
I mean, we're starting with Evicted and Poverty by America. Matthew Desmond, Evicted actually had a very good exhibit at the National Building Museum.
I saw that, yes.
Yes, and he gave a ton of really good talks there too. But this Poverty by America, on the jacket it says the United States, the richest country on earth, has more poverty than any other advanced democracy. Why? Why does this land of plenty allow 1 in every 8 of its children go without basic necessities, permit scores of its citizens to live and die on the streets, and authorize its corporation to pay poverty wages? In this landmark book, the sociologist Matthew Desmond offers new and bracing answers. Poverty in America persists because the rest of us benefit from it. It's an incredible book. I think I finished it in 3 hours or less. It's very well researched. But we prioritize the subsidization of our wealth over the alleviation of poverty, designing a welfare state that gives the most to those who need the least. And we stockpile opportunity in exclusive communities, creating zones of concentrated riches alongside those of concentrated despair. Some lives are made small so that others may grow. And that is so very true of the District of Columbia. And I know that Undesigning the Red Line exhibit is actually going to open at the Cleveland Park Library in the next few weeks. And that's reflective of what we're seeing still and what we're dealing with today, regarding these concentrated pockets of wealth and poverty. And I think it's so essential that these things are talked about and learned about, because you need to know what you may or may not know to be able to come up with solutions and you know, in a reasonable way, right? And not make assumptions and just, these are the facts. And Matthew Desmond is an amazing man, and his work in this space is just provocative and incredibly important. So again, I think I have Evicted here somewhere too. I just didn't have it sitting right in front of me. I have a whole shelf of books that is really structurally unsound, by the way. So
I
if I-
actually have to get
Previewing
going
all I guess
too.
it collapsed
club.
on me.
So good night, everybody.
Okay, and just quickly, because I know we're a little late, I am going to touch on Safer Today, Safer Tomorrow. So Councilmember White, February 27th, introduced the Safer Today, Safer Tomorrow legislative package. Ironically, well, not ironically, it's technically not considered an omnibus bill because it only combines 3 bills. And in order to be an omnibus bill, you have to combine, I believe it's 7 or 9. So there's an interesting factoid for you. So Safer Today, Safer Tomorrow includes 3 bills, and I'll read the quickly. It's the Vocational Education for the Next Generation Act of 2024, the Youth Mentorship through Community Engagement Act of 2024, and the Truancy Reduction for Students Success Act of 2024. And so basically, I'll give you a high-level overview. The Vocational Education for the New Generation Act is a way to transition people who might not be on the college track to a vocational program to teach them how to do, you know, vocational programming, which there are a shortage of people that need to be in those jobs, and they are very high paying, I will say. So that is the vocational education. It will be run through the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, but it's, you know, obviously a different way to program kids who might not strive in the classroom, as Courtney said, to teach to the test. But, you know, they obviously will still receive education through those means, but it's not what's going to choose or indicate whether or not they graduate. The Youth Mentorship through Community Engagement Act, I think, is very interesting. It will partner kids with both paid professional mentors as well as volunteer community leaders, which he does say are ANCs, so just beware of that.
Can I get paid for doing that?
Unfortunately, he does specify unpaid. But it's a way to, he is hoping to put DC youth in touch with people who have seen success both in the traditional and non-traditional ways, because obviously, you know, community leaders could be ANCs, but they could be anybody and anyone who has shown any type of leadership in their community. So I do think it'll be an interesting way for kids to see success both in the traditional and the non-traditional way. So both through paid, mentored, paid, you know, people who are professional in the space of mental health and all of that, and also just people who have made it their mission to try and better their communities. And obviously we talked a lot today about truancy. So the Truancy Reduction Act, and I will read this because it's pretty short. This bill requires that the Office of the State Superintendent for Education will increase student attendance reporting and start to post data monthly by school on their website. So that goes back to Elizabeth's point of getting accurate numbers for each school. Currently, the Office of the State Superintendent for Education does a truancy report only once a year after the school year is concluded, which is too late for intervention. Chronic truancy is a risk for involvement in the criminal justice system, so sharing school attendance is associated with better reading scores and improved graduation rates. The purpose of this legislation is for the school to be able to have more authority to intervene with struggling students sooner rather than later, to offer them support and head off any potential crime before it happens. And then he gives a quote. It has been introduced, like I said, February 27th. So now I would say within the next couple of months would be, if we choose to comment on it. Go ahead, Janelle.
I think there's a hearing scheduled for
Yes.
already.
I think in the committee of the whole. But I can circulate that date.
Yeah.
So now I would say between now and our next meeting in April would be when we should, if we choose to comment on it, and I would be open to hearing everybody's ideas on if we think we should comment on it.
I think so, from my opinion. I also have always found it interesting that the District of Columbia has a wealth of educated population. Like we have the highest educated, college educated folks living here, and it's the mentor, like forcing people to mentor folks is always like, I've always wanted to do it. Like when I lived in Arizona, I taught English as a second language when I was still in college, because the workers that I worked with in the service industry were having so much struggle, like filling out basic forms of like stuff. And it was Arizona, so everything was like English and Spanish, but it was still so hard. And I volunteered my time, and I had to take a class to learn to teach English as a second language. But I felt like I was giving back to my community by doing that, right? so when I came to DC, I also volunteered with a childhood literacy program because I was like, what? Why is this even a thing in the District of Columbia? Like, where you have like so many people who've been given so much opportunity, why aren't they giving back? But maybe that's like my Girl Scout mentality. But I like that, you know, Councilmember Robert White is really putting this front and center, and I hope that it gets some traction, the funding. It's important. Like this is a real opportunity to change lives.
And I agree. And he also just does specify that this comes on the heels of his whole of government response to Public Safety Act of 2023 that was lumped in to the Secure DC bill. So he is not new to the public safety realm. He does say that this is meant to be a proactive measure, so less of a reactive measure like Secure DC was. Sorry, I think I spilled soy sauce all over my keyboard. I'm not entirely sure where it came from. So I do think it would be good for us to comment, since we did in our Secure DC letter state that we would like to see some proactive measures taken. So again, open to everybody's feedback, but just thought I would raise it as the new legislative update.
Adam, when would you like the feedback?
When so I would assume we would have to vote on it at our full ANC meeting in April, Janelle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
And I mean,
Also, anybody is free in this committee
yeah, to
say you're an
testify.
official member of the committee. You're testifying on your behalf, but we discussed this in the committee. But it's not like the official great weight of the ANC if we don't vote on it, but it
Can
gives you.
say I am a member of the ANC3C Public Safety Committee, but I am not acting on behalf of 3C.
Right. But the credibility then is there because we've discussed it, right?
And I mean, Rick, you and I can talk offline if we wanted to schedule maybe just like an extra meeting, because I think our April meeting would fall after the public safety meeting.
You mean a regular ANC meeting, or?
Yeah.
I think that's right, next month. You know, this is the reverse. But yeah, let's talk offline and figure out if we need to move anything around.
I mean, we can discuss over email as well.
Yeah. But it would be good. It would be good to try to comment on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it then.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It's been a good discussion.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week, and we will see you in April.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.